I'm not saying rest is totally up to you. It's not. Worship definitely isn't. We don't get to say whatever feels like worship to you, that's what you do on the Sabbath. We get to the gathered assembly and worship according to the regulative principle, which is to worship as God has prescribed and not do weird things in the congregation that is not prescribed. So worship is pretty black and white. But what should we do in terms of resting? Well, it's obviously fine to do works of necessity. The big principle is rest in a way that refreshes you and that doesn't become an ownership of the day. So I'd say maybe if, like one of the reformers, you like a little bit of lawn bowls, and maybe you gather with a couple of mates and you do lawn bowls together, and there's some strict rules, and in fact there's a bit of a competition going, not necessarily bad, but if you think of Sunday and go, oh, lawn bowls day in between church. Sunday's my lawn day, my lawn bowls competition, or my soccer competition. Was it footy? Is that what the church footy
Yes,
group
sport.
is? Yeah, sport group, whatever. If that's something that holds an unalterable position in your schedule for Sunday, probably going to be a problem because it will start getting in the way. But again, if it's lighthearted or if it's evangelistic in the sense that you're spending some time in the park with people, it's not binding on people to be there, and it is not running you ragged and taking away from the rest you require on the Lord's Day, it could be fine.
Sweet. Maybe this one will just be a clarifying question. What should a typical Sunday look like for a Christian?
Oh, well, even there, it can look very different for different people. It should at least have one gathering with the Lord's people in church, worshipping and hearing the word. That is absolutely every Sunday should be set apart to the Lord in that way. I would recommend, as of course our church runs, that you be at both a gathering in the morning and in the evening. The whole day is free for the Lord. Sunday evening is not dedicated to preparing for Monday. Sunday evening belongs to the Lord's Day and is well and very fittingly dedicated to the Lord. So gathering is the best thing we can do in Sunday evening. So morning, evening gathering, I recommend. Now, what you do at those gatherings, maybe you come here, let's assume you're worshiping the way we worship. But what you do in these gatherings and what you do in between the gatherings is, again, very, I don't want to say individualistic, but I'm going to say that God gives a lot of liberty for us to rest and worship in different ways. So maybe you come in at 7 a.m. and it's your job to get all the air cons off so that everybody isn't breathing carbon monoxide and killing each other and sweating all over each other. And your job is setting up the chairs and getting the lights on and sorting out the rooms for the kids upstairs. Well, that's not an overly sleep-in, rest, Sabbathy kind of feel. But someone's got to do it. So, of course, hopefully that's not every Sunday, or maybe if you love getting up early and that's your thing and that's fine, that's restful enough for you, then that's fine. Other people wouldn't be appropriate for the mother of 6 to come in early and get all that done and drag the kids out of bed early and shove them in a room upstairs while not going to be Sabbathing. So, now maybe you're on worship. You lead the work, which means you're here earlier. Maybe you're on the welcoming team. You have to get up out of bed early. Or you're the deacons. You're working hard. Or you're on lockup. So you're out late still working hard to clean up the room. Or you're on camera and you have to get in, make sure everything's set up, got the stream going. And the first 5 minutes of the sermon, while everybody else is finding their page blessedly, you're making sure all the stream is running and the Wi-Fi is all good. So what you actually do then on a Sabbath, some of it will be service towards other people, which is an act of worship to Jesus. Some of it will be being served by other people as they serve Jesus. And then in between the services even, what do? Some people use their time, like Hudson Taylor, go hit the streets and evangelize or letterbox drop. That's a great thing to do on a Sunday. Anything that would say that evangelism is too active and not appropriate for a Sabbath is precisely the kind of foolishness that Jesus pushed back on and said, Sabbath is made for man. What is the greatest thing you might do for your fellow man? Give them the gospel. Speaking the gospel, if that is breaking the Sabbath, then I break the Sabbath every single Sabbath in my preaching. So maybe evangelize, maybe you go and visit people who need Christian visitation, the infirm who can't come to church, you go visit them, and maybe that's a little bit straining on you, but it's the Lord's Day. That's an appropriate thing to go and do. So maybe you go home and nap and rest. Maybe you stay away from home because you'll be tempted to do chores and get stuff done. So you go and sit leisurely in the park or a friend's place or go out to lunch. I'm going to say a Sunday should look like this. Waking in the joy of the Lord and getting your mind on focusing on the things of the Lord. In fact, a good Sunday starts Saturday, and in fact probably starts Monday, the week before. You want to allocate your week so that you can get all your chores and jobs done so that Sunday isn't backed up with a bunch of jobs to do and chores to do. Sunday night, probably a good idea to get the clothes out, iron the kids' clothes, have your clothes ironed, gentlemen, so that you can get up in the morning, not rush around having to do stuff before you get to church in a rush, chuck on the clothes, be restful, and be thinking about the things of the Lord. I would encourage you, something is practical, chuck on worship music in the car so that you're thinking about the good things of the Lord that He's done in the gospel on your way in. Maybe as a family or as mates or as an individual, you read the Bible on your own on a Sunday morning before church. That would be great. But get in, fellowship, and make your conversations intentionally about Jesus and how people are going in their walk with God. Come in, listen very intentionally, gather with an intention to be blessed by the Word of God and an expectation that He is here to bless you and make you more Christ-like, praying for other people's salvation and growth. And then as you go and spend time with friends and family throughout the day, you would be seeking to double up on the sermon. So chat about it together and ask questions about the text. Maybe pray together or whatever it may be. So fill the day with Jesus in worship and fill the day with restful things that aren't a focus on your usual business. That would be my encouragement.
What should preachers do to honour the Sabbath, Tomlin?
What should preachers do? Preachers should probably set aside another 24-hour block somewhere in their week that they can honour the Sabbath principle, because my ordinary work and labour, which I'm literally paid to do and called by the church to do, is the preaching and the meeting with people. So I actually use Sunday as a day to do counselling sessions, meeting with people, some sermon preparation for the following week, things like that, and I preach twice. Of late, 3 times. So Sunday is definitely not restful for me in the sense of breaking from ordinary labour, although it is very spiritually enriching because I love being among the saints and preaching both exhausts and exhilarates me. But usually pastors will, in order to give themselves fully to the Sunday, to the gathering and to the service of the saints and the shepherding of the flock, they should probably take a 24-hour slot of the week other than Sunday to do their relaxing. They don't answer emails, don't answer calls unless it's an emergency, focus on their family, focus on getting into God's creation, things like that. Because I want to be able to be talking to people on a Sunday, and when they go, hey, can we catch up? I don't want to have in the back of my mind, well, you're not going to be very restful for me today. I know you, I know your problem. Or going, oh, well, I'm pretty busy. If I add you, I don't get a nap. No, I want to keep my Sunday free, so I meet with people into the afternoon here at church, and then at the moment I go down and preach at the Gold Coast. So, yeah.
Sweet. Someone asks, Pastor Tom, what are your thoughts on short sermons?
I have 3 points to make. Each has 4 subpoints, and I will begin with an introduction. Short sermons are great if they're clear, biblical, powerful sermons that aren't motivated by people's boredom or carnality.
Sweet. Probably got like 3 questions left, and then we're done. Nicene Creed. So in the Nicene Creed, which we read this morning, there's a phrase, to judge the quick and the dead. What does the quick mean, and why is there this choice of words?
The quick means the living. I'm thinking of making jokes about people's ability to hobble or run when someone might call fire. But the meaning of quick is literally just meaning the living. So maybe if you read Puritans or read a lot of Spurgeon sermons, he talks a lot about the Spirit coming and quickening us to life. Or if you have a KJV, actually, I think the language of Romans 8 and other passages is that the Spirit quickens us unto life. That literally just means to make alive, to quicken. Therefore, to be quick is to be. We might use the same modern idea when we say lively. Lively means energetic, right? Just like quick might mean energetic and ready to go. Well, quick actually means alive, like our word alive. So, so when it says the quick and the dead, it means Jesus is going to come back. All the dead will not miss judgment or miss resurrection. They will be made alive, and so will the quick, those already living, the quick and the dead. It's just Old English. Would not have obviously been in the original, which was written in Latin and Greek.
Nice. Probably could have just Googled that one, but it's a good question. Okay. What is Calvin's view of this?
Cut out of all of these questions that could just be Googled.
I normally cut them out, but there's some limited questions. So, okay, briefly, what is Calvin's view of the Sabbath?
Give me that thing. Calvin's view is that the Sabbath is rightly called or transitioned into what is called the Lord's Day, so that the Sabbath is really a Mosaic ordinance or a sign of Mosaic covenant. However, that the Sabbath principles translate over for the Christian in the Lord's Day. So he would be one of the guys who said, it's not the Sabbath anymore. The Sabbath was Jewish. We have the Lord's Day. I would be more on a lot of the confessions and the LBC call it the otherwise or rightly called, the quote is rightly called the Christian Sabbath. So we would differ on that. But he does believe that the Sunday, the Lord's Day, the first day of the week is set aside for the preaching of the word, the sacraments, the gathering of the people, the worship of Jesus, and the rest from normal labors.
Cool. What is the difference between a church and a synagogue?
Not much. Wait. Let me answer first. Absolutely everything in the modern day, because a synagogue worships a false god, and Jesus calls them synagogues of Satan because they profess to worship the true God, but in fact reject their Messiah and are of the spirit of the Pharisees, which is of their father, the devil. They reject Christ and therefore miss everything. They hold fast to the Talmud and the rabbinic teachings, and therefore it is a veil over their eyes. They read the Old Testament, but they're not reading the Old Testament. They're blind to it. That's in the modern day. In the Old Testament, or in Jesus' day, the synagogue was the prelude to church, or the synagogue was the gathering of God's people before the New Testament era. So historically, God's people were exiled out of the land due to their punishment, due to their sins and idolatry. God exiled them and then brought them back into the land under Nehemiah, Ezra, Obadiah, Zerubbabel, etc. And in that return to the land, we read in Nehemiah 8 that Ezra, the chief scribe, and other priests and scribes started what became, on the Sabbath, became a reforming and reviving the practice of reading and understanding and applying the Old Testament, or the book of the covenant, they would call it, the book of God's covenant to us, where he wrote everything down that we're supposed to do and spoke to us through the prophets, the Psalms and the prophets. The law, the Psalms and the prophets. So under Nehemiah, Ezra was preaching, and that really set for us what became synagogue practice. That is that on the Sabbaths, not at the temple, not centralized anymore, but everybody in their own towns, they would gather in these things called synagogues, which just means assembly or gathering. And they would come together and they would preach. I don't know how much history we care about, but I like it, so I'll go. They would read some of the Old Testament, They would read all Old Testament. They would read some of the prophets and some of the law, and then there would be a rabbi whose job it would be to give an exhortation sermon on the basis of the Old Testament law and prophets. Interestingly, in John 6, you remember when Jesus feeds the 5,000 and then goes and preaches the sermon on the bread of life, and how he is the bread of life, that is a synagogue sermon. He quotes Deuteronomy and the prophet of Isaiah. It's very likely that it is actually on that synagogue day that the readings for the day were Deuteronomy from the law, when they read the law about the details about the manna from heaven, and then read Isaiah, and then it was Jesus' job as traveling rabbi to give a sermon, and as he's preaching, all of these people gather off the street, off the sea, and find him, and he goes, "Yesterday you fed us." And he goes, "Let me preach to you a sermon." And John 6 is largely, very likely, a synagogue sermon. So anyway, synagogues were when the Jews would gather on Sabbath in their local areas, not centralized at the temple. They would gather there for big holy days, and they would do the readings, do the prayers, do the praises, and do the giving. And then that really, historically at least, that is the practice that carried up until Jesus' day and basically just flipped to the Sunday for the Christians. So the early Jewish Christians were going to synagogue Saturday and doing Sunday worship. And it would have been structured very similarly. Readings of the Old Testament, exhortations on that basis, how it points to Jesus Christ, sacraments and prayers and psalm and hymn singing.
Sweet. There you go. Last question for the night. Is it a sin not to tithe?
No, because tithing is a requirement, technically, of a covenant that none of us belong to. Tithing was literally means tenthing, cutting off the first and best tenth of your grain or income or harvest of some kind, animals and harvest, and giving it to the Lord as a recognition, not that he owns a tenth, but that he owns everything, so he gets the first tenth. Right? So that's old covenant, sounding very Filipino tonight. Covenant. There's the old covenant stipulations, but it wasn't just 10%. It actually went beyond that. It was 10% for Levites. 10% of your income should go to supply the Levites. 10% of it should go to the poor, and then another 10 or I think it was like 3% every year, meaning another 10% over 3 years, would then go towards funding and saving up for the big annual feasts and feasts and holiday celebrations. So it actually ends up being somewhere between 20 and 30% of a person's annual wages, if we can call it that, being given to the Lord. That's not the case in the New Testament. We're not given a tithing principle of an amount or a percentage. Rather, what Paul says is a lot more liberal and would lead us to give a lot more than merely that. He commands us, give out of the joy of your heart as you receive thankfully. You deserve nothing but receive much from God. As you give out of the joy of your heart in salvation, just like Jesus, he was rich, but he became poor in order to give to us. The principle there is we can never give too much. If we give so much that we become poor, good job, you're like Jesus. So as much as, and then he says the other principle is in accordance with each one's prospering. So 1 Corinthians 16:2, he says, put some aside the first day of every week when you gather, so that when I come, I can take up the big collection and go give it to the Jews who are in need. Now that was not even to pay their pastors, which he says in chapter 8 and 9 they should be doing. That was not even to pay for their building or do the runnings of the church. That was just to give to the poor. So the principles are, in response to redemption, not out of a 10% principle. It is out of in accordance to your cheerfulness, and therefore not begrudgingly or annoyedly. And then thirdly, it would be in accordance to your prospering. So you get a better paying job. The Lord seems to open up blessings to you or blesses you by removing certain costs in your budget. The Lord is blessing me. I can give more now. The principle is that does leave open the liberality or the liberty from God that if you're in a place where you cannot give this week, you are welcome to not necessarily give, and that's not necessarily sin. The question becomes between you and God, in your own heart, are you still cheerful? Is this out of selfishness? Is this in response to the gospel? Are you clear of conscience to not give? And there may be cases when we say, yeah, I am, and God doesn't judge that. However, the overwhelming example given to us is also the Macedonian Christians of Philippi, where Paul says they're poor. All the Christians in Philippi are poor, but they're given more than anybody else for the sake of the Jews. And by the way, it's not that they weren't persecuted by Jews, so they didn't have it. No, they were being very persecuted by the Jews in Philippi. They were still not racially or culturally opposed to giving a lot of their funds, though they had little, a lot of the percentage of their money, pooling it together and sending it back to Jerusalem for the sake of the other poor Christians, the Jews. So the example, the call of God, to walk in the spirit of what tithing foreshadowed is that we give generously and trusting that what we give will reap eternal rewards, but that it is not a percentage requirement week by week anymore.
Sweet, that's very helpful. That concludes our Q&A for tonight. Just a quick one. Have a great week. See you all next week.